Hi.
Hello folks. We are on page 630 of In Search of Christian Freedom, the chapter Challenge of Christian Freedom, and Ray is taking up his point about people leaving an organization which is a closed society like the Watchtower. And he then takes us back to the 1st and 2nd and 3rd centuries where he imagines a like problem could have existed. And he reasons on it this way. I think we might help clear our thinking if we considered conditions that prevailed in the early centuries and the problem of Christians then confronted. Men were already fulfilling the apostles' warning about those who would seek to get the disciples to be followers of themselves. And he cites here Acts 20, 29 and 30 about oppressive wolves who would not treat the flock tenderly. Then Ray says persons were being threatened with expulsion from the congregation if they did not conform to the policies of men like Diotrephes. And here he cites 3 John verses 9 and 10. Jesus' messages to 7 congregations found in chapters 2 and 3 of Revelation revealed clearly that the world field had, as foretold, been oversown with weeds among the wheat. His messages exposed deviations from faith, love, and truth that urgently needed correction, or else would result in a withdrawal of his favor and support.
What would a person in, let us say, the 3rd century A.D. do if he felt that matters had reached the point in his area where Christ's headship had been seriously usurped by men, where the conformity called for could be attained only at the sacrifice of conscience, where he felt that Christian truth and spirit and love were being subtly perverted, so much so that there was a discrediting of Christianity? He might live in one of those places where the Apostle Paul had personally labored, such as Ephesus or Thessalonica. An expression of contemplated withdrawal might well be met by others with statements such as, "How could you possibly withdraw? Don't you realize that Paul, Christ's own apostle, personally brought the good news to this area, started the Christian gathering, and that continues to this day? Surely, if anything is amiss, Christ will correct it, and we must just wait on him until he does so. Where did you learn what you have learned? Was it not through and in this gathering? If you withdrew, where would you go? Outside there are only heretics and heathen. Where would you find another gathering the size of this one? You would be in danger of finding yourself all alone, or just part of some tiny splinter group."
What would have been the result had that 3rd century person been overcome by such argumentation, had suppressed his conscientious feelings, closed his eyes to the serious wrongs, and wishfully believed that these would change despite all contrary evidence? Would a course of passive conformity give any assurance against the possibility of his being found among those to whom Christ would say, as he said to persons in Laodicea, "You are neither cold nor hot. I wish you were one or the other, but since you are neither, but only lukewarm, I will spit you out of my mouth," that being Revelation 3:15 and 16 in the Jerusalem Bible. The course on which many professed Christian leaders had then embarked did not change. It continued on until a hierarchical system developed. Had the 3rd century person described the course of passive conformity and encouraged his children and grandchildren to do the same, they would all ultimately have become submissive subjects of that hierarchical system. Had we lived then, would we have found that consequence acceptable? Only if our answer is affirmative could we find acceptable and persuasive the argumentation which encourages passive conformity today.
Surely persons in those times had need of faith in the promise that, quote, "If anyone loves me, he will keep my word, and my Father will love him, and we shall come to him and make our home with him." And he's quoting John 14:23 there in the Jerusalem Bible. The need for faith is no less today than in past times. With faith, we may face circumstances like that of the beleaguered David, and with him say to God, quote, "Cast me not off, neither forsake me, O God of my salvation. When my own father and my mother forsake me, then Jehovah will take me up." And he's quoting Psalm 27, 9 and 10 there.
I have to say, one of the unusual times in our going through Ray's book that I absolutely disagree with his approach here. I believe his argument is seriously flawed at least two levels. One is, I don't think he understands the nature of the so-called apostasy in the early church very well.
Yeah.
He's quite right about the hierarchy forming, but I don't think his schedule, the way he views it as basically starting around the 3rd century, the truth is the hierarchical tendency was there from the beginning, even in the apostolic churches. So that's one problem with the argument. But the bigger one is, what do you do if you see something like, let's say, Revelation 2:3, where there's something happening in the church that seriously impairs its Christian witness? Well, never in the 7 churches in Revelation is the option of leaving, separating oneself, moving to, say, a better church like, let's say, Sardis or Ephesus. That's never an option.
Because in those very passages, they're addressed as churches, Christ churches.
And he says...
And they're told to strengthen what remains, not leave and start something up yourself. Yeah,
and Christ clearly says that if they don't repent, he will move the candlestick. We don't have the we don't have the option of starting our own church in protest against that candlestick that is still Christ's candle.
Yeah.
So we wanted to link on your screen to 2 series we've done on this very issue. One is about the wheat and the weeds, and we'll put the first of those videos up for you, because he does bring up that parable in this very chapter. The other one is on John 14 to 17. Well, did Christ say that there'd be a general apostasy from Christianity?
I think, you know, when you're starting with Russell and Rutherford and kind of thinking that they started off with the right premise and just went bad, which we saw in previous chapters of Ray's thoughts. If you think that, you're kind of missing the fact that those early church congregations were apostolic churches,
founded by apostles.
Yeah,
that's right.
They weren't begun wrong, which I believe. Russell
by separation.
And Rutherford started off wrong. They separated from the church and started a cult.
That's right. So the analogy breaks down, I think, right there. They don't have honorable or apostolic roots. This is not just true of Jehovah's Witnesses, but all the way breakaway groups from the 19th and 20th centuries, and they're still happening.
Yeah,
still happening all the time.
He's still very much influenced by the Watchtower's thinking. You know, the way he analyzes it, you still see him thinking as a witness thinks.
Yeah, so those links to the Wheat and the Weeds videos and the John 14 to 17 about did Christ predict an apostasy from the apostolic churches? That's on your screen. Next time, examining our motivation.